The next bill we'll now jump to is Senate Bill 183. Jennifer Wood from the Rhode Island Center for Justice. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Wood.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify on Senate Bill 183. This bill really, I'm here to testify in support of the bill. It does two very important things. It creates a foreclosure and eviction moratorium during a state of emergency, but it also importantly creates a second and longer-term solution to some of the issues of homelessness and housing instability in our state by creating a mediation diversion program for eviction cases. And why do we need a moratorium during this ongoing pandemic would be one of the first questions I think most people would have about the bill. And, I'm sorry.
You're still there, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the reason that we need the moratorium is that the federal moratorium is going to end, and we need room for rental assistance programs that are available in Rhode Island to work. I've heard a lot of consternation, and I think it's very valid, about landlords that need help because when their tenants can't pay their rent, they still have to pay their mortgages. There's $200 million in rental assistance in Rhode Island right now, and based upon the American Rescue Act, another $200 million will be coming to Rhode Island in the next year. Over the last month, $15 million have gone in payments directly to landlords. The payments do not go to tenants. They can't be misappropriated elsewhere. These rental assistance payments go directly to landlords, and the whole purpose of the moratorium is to stabilize the situation so that both landlords and tenants can be kept safe during that period. Quickly, just to touch on the importance of the mediation program, 80% of all cases settle out of court, and we've heard some very important comments from Senator Archambault and others who practice in the district court. There is a high volume of cases, 65 to 70,000 cases a year. If a lot of that volume can be redirected to trained, capable, and mediators who are well-versed in housing law, they will be able to help the parties resolve their matters. It will save costs for both parties. It saves costs in the court system. And there will be knowledgeable, neutral parties that can take a tremendous amount of that volume and save people days out of work and a lot of headaches and just get a lot of these cases resolved. It happens in the Superior Court. It happens in the federal court. These mediation programs are adopted around the country and extremely successful. In this legislation, the mediation program is modeled on successful programs in Connecticut and Massachusetts that have proven the ability to resolve so many of these matters at lower cost and less distress to the parties. So thank you for the opportunity to testify in favor of this legislation. I know there will be a lot of questions, and I really look forward to working with all of the interested parties to arrive at the kinds of compromise that people have talked about this evening to have the best solutions to stabilize housing in Rhode Island, make that federal rental assistance available so landlords will be remaining economically stable during the emergency and beyond, and also putting in place a permanent mediation program to address some of the volume of these cases at a reasonable cost and at less distress to the parties.
Thank you.
So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. Any questions of this witness? Okay, I don't see any at this time. Thank you for joining us. Next up will be Jordan Mickman from Rhode Island Center for Justice. Welcome to the committee, Jordan Mickman.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name's Jordan Mickman. I'm the supervising attorney at the Rhode Island Center for Justice, and I'll keep it real quick tonight. This bill before you, Senate Bill 183, is intended to take the lessons learned from the past year and implement a predictable legislative mechanism to maintain housing stability during a state of emergency. During the last year, we've had all three branches of Rhode Island government, as well as various agencies of the federal government, create all sorts of different programs, which have created a lot of confusion and loopholes for different types of people, depending on different types of circumstances. So what this bill does is it takes all of the lessons we've learned and all of the various types of programs that we put together into a clear, predictable thing that will exist in a state of emergency. So I just want to take a second to remind all of the opponents of this bill and everyone who's so angry about this that this bill is expressly limited to a state of emergency. During a state of emergency, we do not need to be worrying about all these problems. We don't need tenants worrying about things. We need to make sure that our community is safe and make sure that people have access to the things that they need to get to. I also just want to remind folks that the Landlord-Tenant Act is by no means stacked in favor of tenants in Rhode Island. 9-day eviction cases are the only type of civil action process that gets heard within 9 days. It's an expedited process that favors landlords. There's a lot of misinformation out there, but certainly not enough time to address it in 3 minutes tonight. But the two components of this bill. One, during a state of emergency, there will not be evictions. It's not an absolute bar to any evictions. What it says is evictions may still proceed for criminal reasons if there's criminal conduct going on or any conduct at the apartment that's impacting the health or safety of the tenants, the landlord, or the public. So it's not taking away any method for enforcing rules and contracts and laws. What it's saying is that people will not become homeless during a state of emergency. The mediation program is an eviction diversion program that is exactly what it sounds like. It is intended to keep people out of court when their housing is on the line. We all know that going to eviction court has major long-term repercussions for folks who are seeking housing. And the point here is that mediation works. Alternative dispute resolution, arbitration, these are things that have been adopted internationally and across the country by big businesses that are forcing consumers into these small things all the time. And the truth is they work. People get to the table. Before they hated each other, but then they sit down with a mediator who listens to both sides tell their story. And I've sat through mediations myself personally, and almost every single time you reach a resolution there. So this is something that I can personally say is something that will avoid evictions while also preserving both sides' rights. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mickman. Any questions for this witness? I don't see any at this time. Thank you so much for be David Belise of the Rhode Island Interfaith Coalition to Reduce Poverty. Good evening, Mr. Belise.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
I understand that you're testifying on Senate Bill 183
Yes.
and 421, I believe.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much to the committee and chairperson. My name is David Belise. I am the director and lead organizer of the Rhode Island Interfaith Coalition to Reduce Poverty, and I'm here to voice my support for the following bills. First, on 183, thank you to Senator Gaure for introducing it, everyone who signed on. This is about housing security, and housing insecurity is higher than ever before, and the pandemic has made this problem a lot worse. And uncertainty can be traumatic for families, and in a state of in emergency, we are just trying to keep our families safe. Many people lost their jobs and income during the pandemic, and it would have been disastrous if the federal government didn't step in. We can't take that for granted. We must make it so that in Rhode Island, we are protecting families during a crisis. When people are worrying about food, safety bills, we can't have them facing homelessness. This legislation makes so much sense. Why wouldn't we protect people? The Rhode Island Interfaith Coalition to Reduce Poverty represents over 80 faith organizations, local congregations, and service and advocacy organizations across the state. As people of faith, we believe that all individuals and families deserve the right to a decent and safe place to live. We believe that housing should be a right and not a privilege. For Senate Bill 421, this bill is close to my heart. As someone who was undocumented as a child, I remember the fear that existed in my home regarding housing, food, and medical treatment. I always think back and thank God that a local pastor took my family in and rented us an apartment. He saw a hardworking single mom who wanted a better life for her kids, wanting the American dream, wanting to escape a war and live in a great land. I'm grateful that that landlord didn't see a different narrative, a twisted immigration narrative that we often see in this country. But I like to believe that in Rhode Island we are better. We are heading in the right direction. We have a vibrant immigrant community that contributes a lot to the economy and to the culture of the state. Also, this is about housing. There is a lack of affordable housing. So if a person is finding housing, we should not be giving any additional barriers. Speaking about barriers, lastly, I want to show my support for Senate Bill 561. Thank you, Senator Kama, for introducing one. Rhode Island currently has a shortage of decent affordable housing, as I mentioned, and many families struggle to find housing they can afford. The problem of finding housing can be even more difficult for families who pay part or all of their rent with income from sources other than employment. Many Rhode Islanders already face discrimination based on race, sexual orientation, and even age. We should be doing everything we can to end discrimination and to keep people housed. We don't need any more barriers for families. This is about doing what's right. People should not be automatically assumed to be unacceptable or undesirable tenants simply based on their source of legal income. Every renter should be given an equal opportunity to apply for housing and be evaluated on their merits. During this uncertain time, we have a moral obligation to keep people housed and safe. Thank you all for your time. Thank you all for hearing me, and I'm sorry if I spoke really fast. I always get jarred by the phone calls.
It's okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Belise. You did a great job. Thank you. Are there any questions for this witness from members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you. We'll go to our next call. Which is, who is Brenda Taylor on behalf of DARE.
Oh,
Hi, Ms. Taylor.
yes.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
You may proceed.
Say that again?
You may proceed, thanks. You're on for
Okay.
the committee, so go ahead.
I'm calling on behalf of the Southside. I live in an area on New Point and Prairie and Friendship. And I'm calling concerning evictions in our area and what they do during this time of COVID and how difficult it is for families and people in general to survive. It's very hard. One of the things that happened to me that sent me to a local organization, which was DARE, I had received an eviction notice, and I couldn't understand why. I had paid my rent, given it to the manager, and left saying everything was okay. About 5 days or so had passed, and I get this note that it's a letter that I'm being evicted on grounds of non-payment of rent. So what happened to me, because I'm a little older, quite a bit, over 60, I had something happen where I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't understand that. My heart was racing. I said, oh, my God, what's happening? But what I found out, it was a panic attack or an anxiety attack. Because this situation was out of control. Where am I going to live? What am I being evicted for? I paid my rent. I'm not a bad tenant. What happened? Well, I'm going to DARE. They checked up on the information. They called the manager's office and, different things, and went on my background and that I'm very good with paying my rent. And come to find out the young person had put it somewhere and forgotten it. It was a check, and they had forgotten where they had put it, and then they found it something like 12 days later. And I went through a lot. I had to go to the doctor. I had to get a medication because trying to find housing today, unbelievable. Unbelievable. I said, where am I going to come up with if they're asking something like $600 or $700 or $800 a month for maybe a one-bedroom? I need 2 months of a security deposit. That's $16. I don't have that. I have no way of getting it either. So that was my dilemma there. Now, here I am in a community where I know a lot of people. I've met them, I've spoken to them, and here comes COVID. And people are losing their jobs. People are being told, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to go. I got to get somebody in here that can pay rent. But they are not understanding that these people are under really hard hardships. They have families they have to take care of, support. It's a lot. Lights, in the complex where I live, if your lights go off, that is grounds for eviction. If your utilities, if they go out, you got to go. So the housing stock, we don't have that much, and it's not affordable. It's not all affordable. If you have to pay something like $1,200, $15, you better be making $30 or $40 an hour to be able to pay $1,200 or $1,500 a month for rent. And we all don't make that kind of money. Professional, maybe the plumber, maybe a welder, I don't know. But we're not making it. And we need, in our area here in South Providence, something called affordable housing. Also during COVID, there are families that are being separated. Or maybe you can go and stay with my cousin. These kids go over here and stay with because you're trying to find this is all dangerous. We need help with housing. And then people that are able of color to get a house, and they're under the same situations, maybe losing a job or losing someone that was there to help them pay the bills or the tenants. They're in dire straits. It's tough. It is, and they're going to lose everything that they've tried to work so hard to get.
Mrs.
And
Taylor,
I know,
Ms. Taylor, thank you very much. I always appreciate your comments. I just ask if you could wrap it up very quickly. We're trying to. We've got 100 people.
okay,
and-
honey, I will.
Yes, I always appreciate you. Thank you.
I'm going to wrap it up real fast. I think the only thing I can say is to love one another and do the nicest thing for each other. The people at the top may be looking down, but there's always that chance of the same ones looking down may be looking up also. So COVID showed it to us all. Thank you. Have a good evening and a good day. God bless. Bye.
Our next caller is Malchus Mills with DARE and the Homeowners Association, Tenant and Homeowners Association.
Hello?
Malchus, are you there?
Yes, I am.
How you doing, my friend? Good to hear from you. Please, you can proceed.
Okay, what I would like to impart to the committee, in fact, hello everyone that knows me, and for those you don't, I hope when we start to meet in person again, you'll get a chance, we'll get a chance to talk. It's very important that we have a continued moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. We're going to strain an already homeless rolls as it is. There's no need in making, new homeless people. I mean, we're supposed to have, or tenants are supposed to be able to go and apply for money so that they can pay their rent and whatnot. Why don't we make that more accessible? Why is that so difficult for folks to get, to that money? You know what I'm saying? That is sorely needed. Excuse me. Plus, that would help the landlords out also. I mean, we cannot, let this virus turn, landlords loose just to put people out to be putting folks out. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it just can't happen. It's not going to be a pretty sight, for real. There has to be another way. It has to be a better way, to continue the Fed moratorium would be the thing to do, because people, even after the pandemic is over, people are still going to need a few months to get it together, because, they'll be just going back to work, and, you can't pay everybody all at once, unless they're going to suspend all of that and just help the landlords out, with their mortgages, and still keep the tenants there until they're able to pay. This bill, it makes sense because it's going to help people stay in their home. It's going to help families stay in stay in their homes, and this is what's needed. We're just okay. Winter is flowing by pretty quick, and we still can't afford to be putting people outside. We just cannot. We have to continue the moratorium. We have to find a way to get money into the tenants' hands that need it, to the landlords that need it, and that has to come about. That has to come about because the black and brown and the poor communities are feeling the brunt of this, and we need your help, and we need your understanding. So I'm hoping that you find it in your heart, to help some of us less fortunate, so that we all can have a home or a place to call home. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you guys very soon.
Thank you, Malchus. Always appreciate your testimony. Do any members of the committee have? Our next caller is Kristin Seery, and she is a self-caller. Good evening, Ms. Seery.
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. You're here to testify on Bills 183, and I've also noticed 524. So you may proceed. And why don't you start with 183, and then you can move on to 524.
Yes, sir. I actually combined my testimony for both. It was actually 528 and 183. I apologize if I signed up incorrectly.
Okay. That's okay. Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Kristin Seery, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bills 528 and 183. I'm a renter who was evicted in August of 2020 due to alleged non-payment. I'd like to start with a couple sentences describing the situation leading to my eviction and why the particulars are relevant. Then I'll move on to the effects of the eviction has had on my life before concluding with a plea that you please support Senate Bills 528 and 183. In February, just after the start of the quarantine, I was just $65 short on rent. Once my unemployment claim was processed, I tried to pay the little back rent I owed, but my landlord would not accept my money or subsequent payments. I held on to the money, and at my eviction hearing, I presented a payment plan that would have me completely caught up on back rent within 2 weeks. My plan was rejected, and I was given a month to vacate my home. Why is this relevant? I think it shows that this debate is not solely or even primarily about a landlord's right to be compensated. It demonstrates that often these non-payment evictions are not about money. Rather, money is being used as an excuse to evict inconvenient tenants who ask that their units be safe and habitable, for example. This is just one of too many loopholes in the federal moratorium. Eviction at any time is traumatic. At this time, it causes damage to tenants' personal and professional lives that can be irreparable. I'll now move on to the effects of my eviction on my life. Not only did I lose my home to eviction, but I also lost my network of neighbors and friends. I am now without my social support system. I lost my home-based business. My local clientele moved on, and so I don't have a job to come back to when the COVID crisis is over. I had to leave Rhode Island to find affordable Airbnbs, and I don't anticipate being able to return to Rhode Island anytime soon, not with an eviction on my record and an uncertain employment future. I lost access to my Rhode Island-based health care and have had to stop taking regular medications I've been on for years. My health has suffered considerably. But worst of all, my dog Kayla fell ill. and I wasn't in Rhode Island to get her to the vet. She took her last breaths as I laid beside her on the floor of an unfurnished Airbnb on January 29th. All of these losses have made it very difficult to recover and resume my position as a contributing member of society. I think we all, landlords and tenants alike, would agree that the more people that are working and functioning normally, the better for the financial and moral recovery from this global disaster. Protecting tenants from these losses is in everyone's best interest. I conclude by asking that you please support both Bills 528 and 183. 2020 has brought the world some loss that is unavoidable, but there is so much loss and suffering that is preventable. Please protect Rhode Island renters. Thank you for your time.
Yes, and thank you very much for sharing your situation and the sadness of it, and our prayers are with you on your loss. I'm really, really sorry for that. Any members of the committee have any questions?
But most of the Section 8 tenants that aren't able to rent from us are not able to rent from us because Section 8 doesn't pay a high enough rent, and we can get more in the market. And so
Our next caller is Kate Schapira. Ms. Schapira?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, good evening. Thank you. You may proceed. You're here to testify on 183, so you may proceed.
That's correct. Thank you to the chair and the vice chair and to the committee. Senators, the merits to all of your constituents of passing this bill are that people get to stay in their homes and retain their property. Senator Oyer laid it out really well, so you already know that it makes sense for people to stay in their homes during a health crisis, which is also during a housing crisis, which is also during an employment crisis. It makes sense because losing homes to eviction or taking yet another big financial hit through foreclosure would compound the damage from all of those things and make them harder to come back from, trapping people in poverty, exposing them to COVID, and straining their relationships in the ways that many witnesses have already spoken about. And now I want to talk briefly about the merits to you. This bill is easy. It is so easy. With the exception of the mediation process that it provides for, which does involve doing a few things in a simpler and less punitive way, it is mainly about doing nothing and committing others to doing nothing. Most of the things that would actually help Rhode Islanders with housing require a lot of people to do a lot, spending money, restructuring a business model, building units of housing, and so on. And I believe some of those bills are going to be coming across your desk as well. But this mainly requires you to just say no. And the no that you have to say is not even going to hurt any of your constituents. If you own rental property, it's also going to hurt you. If this bill only covered tenants, I can understand being a little wary of it. Your constituents or yourself, if you own and rent property, could potentially be hurt by it or worry. And you've heard some of them express that fear tonight. But the moratorium does cover foreclosures as well. Senator Rogers, I also heard you raise this concern. So the main entities that could potentially be hurt by it are banks. And of everybody in this chain, tenants, landlords, property management companies, and banks, the banks are by far the best equipped to absorb the shock. They are literally where the money is. They are set up to ride waves that will swamp many landlords and almost all tenants. And the banks are not your constituents. Other than possibly your own mortgage payments, you don't owe anything to banks, whereas to your constituents, you owe the representation of their will. And I guarantee you, and you've heard some tonight, that part of their will is to choose when they move and to not have their lives further disrupted. The other merit that this bill is going to have for you is that if you pass it to the Senate floor and vote for it there, your names will not be publicly linked, including by me, as loudly as possible, to a truly incomprehensible failure to provide some basic security for Rhode Island residents and give our state a chance to rally, both this time and in the next emergency. I heard a couple people on this committee describing this legislation as well-intended or altruistic. That is not what this is. It is making sure that the people who keep this state running, the people who this bill would do the most for, are the people who have been described as essential workers throughout this pandemic but have not been treated as essential by the state. It is making sure that those people will not be too cold, too hungry, too destabilized, or too sick to do that work. Senate Bill 183 builds in breathing space that Rhode Island owes its residents for keeping this state running during this time. It builds in resilience that serves us all. Please expedite whatever further study is necessary to bring it to the Senate floor in time to serve people who need that breathing space and that resilience now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schapira. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Our next caller is Jacqueline Goldman. Good evening, Ms. Goldman.
Hello.
Hi, good evening.
So I'm here to testify. My name is Jacqueline Goldman, and I'm here to testify on 183, 561, and 421, but also I would like to add support for 131, 528, and 563. So as I said, my name is Jacqueline Goldman, and I work in public health research, primarily with folks who are unstably and marginally housed. One of the things that we're already seeing is that there are new tent villages popping up all the time. The rate of people who are unhoused and unsheltered in Rhode Island is up 500% from last year. And this, we all know all of the consequences that come from being unhoused. We've heard very passionate and very important arguments from tonight from people who have been evicted and all of the things that that's caused them. And if we care about the people in our state, one of the things that we need to do is to protect people from becoming homeless in the future. Already, our state does not have the infrastructure to be able to support people who are unhoused, and it costs more money to rehouse people than it does to keep them in their current apartments. And this means that we need to make sure that these people are not evicted and forcibly removed from their houses. Now, I hear the small landlords and the concerns that they have, and I know that in the House version of this bill, there's actually a fund to be able to protect small-time landlords. I also think that we need to listen to the testimony that Kate Schapira just gave and talking about the fact that this really impacts the banks and that they're the ones who can bear the shock. And so I urge you to pass all of these different bills that break down barriers to housing. This means ending discrimination on income. This means ending discrimination based on gender, sexuality, immigration status, and things like that. And also making sure that when someone dies, the other people living in that property have access to housing. So I urge you to pass all of these on behalf of tenants, on behalf of your constituents, on behalf of the people of Rhode Island. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Goldman. Are there any questions? Hi, you may proceed. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tal Freegan, and I am a member of Reclaim Rhode Island, and I work for Demand Progress. And I'd like to testify in favor of Senate Bill 183 and the bills preventing evictions and foreclosures for the duration of the pandemic. And I want to start by saying that these eviction and foreclosure moratoriums for the duration of the pandemic are a compromise. These bills state that no tenant should be kicked out during a pandemic and no homeowner should be foreclosed upon in the middle of a public health emergency. But these bills don't guarantee housing as a human right or provide homes for all or end the cycle of poverty and houselessness that plague our state. It just makes sure that the most vulnerable people aren't forced into the street in the middle of a deadly pandemic. And I want to briefly share a story about a friend of mine who left the ACI, the prison in Rhode Island, just over a year and a half ago, who has experienced housing insecurity since they re-entered society due to addiction and the lack of services for people experiencing addiction, the high barriers to re-entry after years of incarceration, and the unaffordability of the housing market in Rhode Island. Since they were released from the ACI, they've moved between sober living houses, friends' couches, occasionally being able to hold down an apartment, but consistently facing housing insecurity. And I've watched as this person has struggled to find their footing after being in prison for years. And the reason I mention this story is the bills in front of us tonight, Senate Bill 183 and the bills preventing evictions during the pandemic, really ask the question not of whether everyone deserves housing, which we know is morally true, but rather who should bear the burden of the failure of our state to provide housing as a human right. We are watching as this failure plays out across the country, and especially in Rhode Island, where a living wage is over $23 an hour. These bills ask us who should bear the burden of this failure of our state to provide housing. Banks provide mortgages knowing the risks of a housing market, and if they lose money on their investments, no one loses their home. Senate Bill 183 protects the most vulnerable during a public health emergency and is an important stopgap measure to make sure that tenants and homeowners don't get kicked out of their homes in the middle of a public health emergency. This means that the only people who may lose out at the end of all this are large banks who accepted the risks of providing mortgages and who may not make as much money on loans that they doled out knowing their own risks. As I said before, these bills are simply a compromise. They don't provide housing as a human right, which should be the goal of housing policy in our state, and instead just ensure that the people paying the price of our failure to provide housing are not tenants or homeowners, but rather banks that can afford to take losses during a public health emergency to make sure that people can stay in their homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for this witness from any? Our next witness is Ruth Diamond Madsen with the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. That is the Voices of the Homeless. Ms. Madsen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, good evening. I see you're here to testify on several bills, 183, 528, and 561. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It
Yes.
is.
Oh, yeah. So you may proceed, and why don't you just address all the bills in your own turn?
Okay. Kind of off tonight, so you got to forgive me. I want to first start off by telling you guys thank you for listening to us as constituents and people that are calling in. These bills, to me, are very important, more so now in those last 24 hours than anything. I was originally homeless, and I've changed my life dramatically. I'm now housed. I live in Pawtucket. I'm an outreach worker. I'm an advocate worker. The bills that are up for people are very important, you know. If you have a sealed record for one mistake, you know, that deems you from ever trying to get housing, public housing again. For the income on top of that, I have Section 8. I'm blessed to have my Section 8 voucher, you know, because I can't work, you know, and I'm sorry, sir.
It's okay. You're doing a good job. Take your time.
These bills, you know, they mean everything to me right now. You know, Kristina and everybody knows that's with me. This is going to be my last speaking engagement for a little while. You know, I want to tell you guys at State House, thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of everything. You know, I'm going to carry you guys with me in my heart. I just lost my brother Tuesday, you know, and my brother was a police officer in Tampa. He got killed. He was an officer that got killed on the wrong way driving. And what I do now, I'm realizing that it makes a difference in people's lives, and that's what he was here for, to help people when they needed it, good, bad, or indifference. And, you know, I speak because I want to help people. I speak because people that were in my situation can't speak because we get punished. Even down to me right now with what I'm going through with my housing issues, and I'm housed. I'm being punished for something that, you know, doesn't make sense. Discrimination is everywhere. Nobody needs to be discriminated because of race, creed, color, gender, income barrier they have. You know, we're all the same. You know, if we just put our arms together, you know, we bleed red the same. Our skin color is different, but everybody's here to help everybody. At least they're supposed to be. You know, and I'm going to carry that message from now on more because, you know, my brother retired after, he got killed after, and it was his final watch Tuesday. It was 17 years before he was a police officer. He also retired as a Simplify from the U.S. Marines. You know, my family does a lot for people like me that were where they're at, and I'm going to continue this because my words are powerful. I'm here to help people. You know, the State House, I commend you guys so much for giving me a chance to speak on these bills, to learn how to come into the State House and talk to you guys, because it's not something I'm used to. But please, if you take anything from what I say, just consider that you were in our shoes and you didn't have money, or you had eviction on your record and you need to get an apartment and you had a family and you were sleeping in a car and you couldn't get that and you had nobody to help you. Think about how these people feel right now with nobody except for you to lean on, to say, please, take this discrimination thing off. Please, take this income barrier off for us. Give us a chance, because they're not all bad people out there. If you sit down and talk to them, you would really be surprised. They're very smart people. They just have bad situations, and everybody has them. But everybody needs a chance to have somebody good in their life. Thank you.
Ms. Madsen, thank you very much for your testimony, and we're really sorry on behalf of the Senate. I want to extend my condolences. We're really sorry for the loss of your brother. That's tragic. So our prayers are with you and his family, and you had very compelling testimony. Thank you for taking the time tonight, even in light of your recent loss. So are there any...
No.
Oh, yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me do this, because I love to speak, you know.
Oh, of course. This is your house. So are there any questions for Ms. Madsen from any members of the committee? Thank you very much. Our next witness is Wendy Thomas, also with the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless and the Voices of the Homeless. Ms. Thomas?
Yes.
Oh, yes, Mr. Tyler. I had Wendy Thomas. Yes, you may proceed. Go ahead.
Yes. I'm Wendy Thomas. I'm part of the Voices of the Homeless through the Coalition for the Homeless. I'm here to speak on 528 and 561 for the most part. S183, I think mostly I don't know all that much about it at this point, but I think at this point that sounds like they're really asking for time for people to get themselves together so that they can take care of what they have to take care of.
Sure, and you can testify on 528 and 561. You go ahead. That's fine.
As far as S528 goes, sale and eviction records, I don't believe that any eviction records should be showing at all to a landlord until there is a verdict. If there is a verdict against the tenant, yes. Not if the verdict is for the tenant or before it even goes to trial. And on 561, which is, of course, my favorite one, there's no reason for discrimination no matter what. Whether your color, your sexual orientation, your source of income. Your source of income, just because you're getting Social Security, you got Section 8, or in my daughter's case, you're on unemployment, especially in these times, there is no way that you should be discriminated on any of those things, and you should be able to be considered. And I'm not saying landlords have to change their rent to do a Section 8 voucher. I'm saying you should be able to continue to be considered at least on your merits, not on your source of income. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Thomas. Does anyone have any questions of Ms. Thomas? Thank you again for your testimony. Next, we have Thomas Waters to testify on Bill S-183. Good evening, Mr. Waters. You may proceed.
Okay.
You may begin your testimony.
Actually, I was evicted unlawfully. I was getting arrested. I went to jail. I got out and all my stuff was gone. And they stole my car, my dogs. I mean, a slum landlord. And I just think it's wrong. I don't understand how people could do that. I don't know. But it's like, it's been now like over a year and a half. It's nuts. Just, I don't think they should have the right to do that. They don't want to fix nothing in the house. We'll collect your rent, collect the rent. They want to fix nothing. I don't know. I just want to help people out there. I don't know what to say. That's all I have to say, honey.
Well, Mr. Waters, we appreciate you taking time to give your testimony and speak this evening on this bill. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Waters? We should have Terri Wright from DARE, Direct Action for Rights and Equality, on the phone right now to testify. Good evening.
Good evening. Yes, thank you, everyone. I just want to start by saying I am representing DARE, Direct Action for Rights and Equality, where we advocate for families facing evictions and foreclosures, and we also advocate for housing justice. The current bill 183 needs to be, we need this bill to be passed. And I would just really start with a story of landlord intimidation. I have Tenant who's experiencing landlord intimidation. And the only reason she is staying at that residence is because she has evictions. And she's afraid of getting evicted and not having a place to stay. I do not think an eviction record should follow a tenant around like it's a criminal record. I just really don't. A lot of court cases, when a landlord's looking at it and they see that it's an eviction, some evictions are ill-gotten. A lot of the evictions are not, the fault of tenants, but they're there. And evictions serve as a barrier for any housing. It's hard to get housing if you have evictions. So I just really think that this bill should be passed, and I'm just asking that this bill be passed at the same time.
I also have you down, Ms. Wright, to speak on Senate Bill 528.
Yes, Senate Bill 528. I'll begin by saying this housing crisis is the result of decades of neglect. We cannot begin to fix Rhode Island's housing crisis without the passage of this bill. And homelessness should not be viewed as normal. Housing is an essential item. I'm afraid if this bill does not get passed, that the result would be mass evictions, mass incarcerations. Crime will go up because people will do what they need to do to survive. Mental illness, homelessness, displacement. We are in a pandemic, and I believe at the state and local level, Rhode Island should be taken care of and secured. There should be no evictions happening during the pandemic. That's just, that's my belief. We are here to stop evictions and save lives, and we're going to end up with a public health crisis if evictions are allowed during the pandemic and foreclosures.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. Does any committee members have any question of Ms. Wright? Ms. Wright, thank you so much for calling in, and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for having me. And stay safe, wear your mask, social distance, wash your hands. Have a great night.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. We should have Kristina Contreras Fox from the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. Welcome, Ms. Fox.
Hello. Good evening, Chairwoman Coyne and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. My name is Kristina Contreras Fox, and I'm the Senior Policy Analyst with the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. And we are signed up to testify in support for quite a few of the bills that are being heard right now. But I would like to speak specifically to Senate Bill 183, 561, and 528.
Very good.
So we're very supportive of these bills, and I'm going to take the two bills that deal with evictions first, because eviction is a root cause of homelessness, and this was a crisis in our state even before the pandemic hit. Rhode Island has literally the highest eviction rate in the region. Excuse me, it is even higher than our national average. And this is, eviction being a cause of homelessness is something that is not going to be fixed by a single bill, but we need to see serious action taken in order for this to be addressed, because now evictions during a public health crisis of this magnitude have already been devastating for so many communities and so many people who have already spoken tonight, but it would be devastating for the state overall. Excuse me. And we know that this, the bill that's been introduced would establish a moratorium on both eviction and foreclosure, because this is, I mean, even this piece of addressing how do we keep people safe and in their homes during this time, it is a manifold puzzle. We need to ensure that people can stay safe in their homes. We need to ensure that there is money that can be going to ensure that people can pay mortgages and don't lose their property. As some folks have mentioned already tonight, Rhode Island has seen, as a result of several stimulus packages, millions of dollars come in for emergency rental assistance, and this is fantastic and very important. But one thing that's important to know about ERA is that these funds are not accessible to people experiencing homelessness. You have to be on the brink of, you have to be facing an eviction. But if you are evicted and you lose your home, there is really nothing available for you through these funds, even though the money amount is very high. Excuse me. Advocates understand this. The Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, we're a dynamic coalition of housing providers, service providers, which I will say are distinctly different from property managers, aka landlords, and others who work together to advance creative solutions to end and prevent homelessness in Rhode Island. We've been very active at the federal level in pushing for there to be resources coming into our state to address our eviction crisis, to address homelessness, to keep people safely housed. But one thing that did not pass in the American Rescue Plan Act was an extension of the moratorium, which is set to expire at the end of the month. And we did not see, as I said, in ERA, an expansion of making those funds accessible to people experiencing homelessness. We need the state to take action here. We need the partnership of the General Assembly. And 528 also is an important step forward in addressing eviction as a root cause of homelessness. As the law stands right now, if a tenant has been taken to court and they are found, the verdict goes in their favor, that eviction still causes them harm. That eviction is still a mark on their record that can't be undone as the law stands right now. And that, we believe, the Coalition for the Homeless and many who have spoken tonight believe that if a tenant goes through the stress and uncertainty and the trauma of an eviction with the verdict decided in their favor, that eviction case should not cause them or their family further harm. It should not cause them to become further unstable and insecure with their housing or even experience homelessness. This is a very simple step forward that the General Assembly can take that we urge you to. And then to speak to 569, which is ban discrimination based on source of income. This is one that we've come to you before many years, Senate committee, asking for your support here, and you've given that. We're asking for you to do this again. Source of income discrimination is a poisonous concept. Prospective tenants have income. They have a means to pay, but the landlord gets to say right now, I don't like the way that you're paying. This creates a barrier to housing that no amount of self-advocacy or any other recourse can overcome. And I want to share with you the story from one of our call center agents. We help manage the state's coordinated entry system hotline. And I'll tell the story now. I had a client who initially sought diversion assistance.
Ms.
I'm
Fox?
sorry, yes?
Yes, if you could please be brief. We have many people waiting to speak, and we have a 3-minute time limit.
Absolutely. I apologize, but this story here demonstrates this person called us seeking help, and we tried to work with him, but every single time this person went to try to rent an apartment, it did not matter what rapport they had built with the landlord liked them, but as soon as they found out, oh, you're paying with a voucher, suddenly this apartment is not available anymore. SOI discrimination puts the wrong roof over people's heads. We need to remove this. And the other two bills, which deal with fair housing, expanding protections for people based on immigration status and sexual orientation, are also essential. These are all very important bills. We urge the committee to pass on them to the floor because they will help end and prevent homelessness in Rhode Island. I apologize for being wordy, but this is a very important issue, and I thank you very much for your consideration.
And thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony today. Yes, Senator Reptakis.
I just want to bring some facts together. I know some of the witnesses are coming out with some of these facts, but Providence, Rhode Island, out of 100 cities, ranked 75th, 3.8% as far as eviction. So I don't know where the facts are being brought to us that Providence, Rhode Island has one of the highest eviction rates. Rhode Island is toward the bottom. Of the top 100 cities, we ranked 75th. And that's a survey that was done a couple of years ago. So I just want to make sure that any witness that is testifying that the facts are, what they're saying are factual. So we want to make sure that any testimony is given that we're absolutely being factual on the evidence. Thank you.
Next up is Alexandra Gaure from Project Weber Renew. Welcome to the committee.
Hello.
Hello. I believe you're speaking on Senate Bill number 183. If you could keep your remarks to 3 minutes, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
You got it. Thank you.
You may begin. Are you still
Hello.
with?
Hello. Hi. My name is Alexandra Gaure.
Yes, begin your testimony, please, on Senate Bill 183.
Thank you. I'm here in support of Senate Bill 183 and also 528. I'm an outreach worker in Providence. I work with folks that are homeless every day. If stopping evictions does save lives, I want to reiterate that anything to keep our people housed and off the streets is harm reduction. I want to specifically advocate for one of my clients who just got wrongfully evicted. They have been in recovery for many years, have been meeting their rent on time without a delay. However, they got wrongfully evicted by having the landlord mistake their name for somebody else. They came home to all of their belongings gone in the trash. Even when evictions happen, they're supposed to hold people's belongings. To this day, my friend has lost everything that they owned, all of their heirlooms, all the family heirlooms, and any pictures left from their family. At this point, this is completely unacceptable. This shouldn't happen to anyone else. During an eviction moratorium, I know that I just heard somebody say that, where are people getting these facts? I would trust the community members that are out there doing the work every day. That's where the facts are coming from, is that maybe you don't see those on those numbers, but these real lived experiences are happening every day, and we must do anything that we can to stop evictions from happening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gaure. Do any of the committee members have any questions for this witness? Next up, we have Mr. Everett Pope from the George Wiley Center. Good evening, Mr. Pope. You may begin your testimony.
My testimony will be relatively brief. I think it's important for this bill to go through because essentially during the time of the pandemic, there's been so much turmoil, and I just feel as though you should provide protection for both homeowners and both the renters. And from what I understand, this bill kind of provides a safe haven for both the homeowners and for both the homeowners and the people who are renting, and it kind of gives everybody a fair and level playing ground. And also, it's a way where people who don't have the advantage can kind of get a little bit of leverage in a sense. I also think it's just very important that in a general sense that we just have a little bit of humanity return to our policies, and we kind of throw caution to the wind in terms of when we're faced with like crisis and states of emergency, like we should always think about putting the people first. So that's my piece. Thank you guys for the time.
Thank you very much for your testimony this evening. Any questions from committee members? Next is Tracy Tuttle. Good evening, Ms. Tuttle. You're here to speak on Senate Bill 183.
Yes, I'm actually, I was actually evicted from my apartment this week. I'm actually staying in a hotel with 7 children. I lived in the premises for 5 years. I was told by the judge that I couldn't, that I had to be evicted because it wasn't for non-payment. So I got evicted for not a non-payment. It was just she had a personal vendetta against me, the new owner. I'm totally against this eviction during this COVID thing. Like I said, I'm now staying in a hotel paying $500 a week, my whole paycheck, to live. I'm not understanding how these landlords are being able to just kick us out like this. I was given exactly 6 days to get out.
I'm very sorry to hear that, but I do appreciate you taking the time in to call and have you express your concerns. Thank you for calling in this evening. Does anyone have any questions? All set. Thank you.
As you're aware, we have a housing shortage. The bills presented will add to this crisis. They have a deterrent to investors and finances. The bills would have a negative effect on new unit construction, vacant units, and rehabs. Homelessness will increase. Now, on a personal note, I own rental units. I've worked days, nights, weekends, keeping the properties clean, safe, modernized, and energy efficient to provide homes to families who reside there. And there are many. In my opinion, both bills, 183 and 528, will devastate not just me, but all multi-unit owners.
I believe we have Gregory Wachmolsky, Tenant Network of Rhode Island, to testify on Bill S-528. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you so much. First, let me say we all really appreciate the service of the chair. Senator Coyne, you're doing a heck of a job tonight. There are an awful lot of callers. There are an awful lot of housing justice bills, and we've been hearing some really great performance opinions on a lot of these matters. I'm here to testify tonight on 183 as well as 528. At Tenant Network of Rhode Island, we get a lot of calls from a lot of renters, a lot of tenants, a lot of landlords, a lot of people wondering, why is it exactly that we need to steal eviction records? And I'm going to let other people speak on that tonight. We also get asked a lot about why is it that the state needs an expanded moratorium when the CDC moratorium may get extended at the end of this month. And I have to tell people because of 2 reasons. The first one is, pretty clear. The difference between 9 and 20-day evictions is that 20-day are for any reason, 9-day are for non-payment. Right now, we're seeing about 2,700 evictions since coronavirus, and that figure is up to the beginning of February. Out of those, about 30% of them have been for reasons other than non-payment, 20-day evictions. And those, as you may know, aren't covered under the CDC eviction moratorium. So that Band-Aid, even if it does get extended, is missing out on almost 1,000 people so far who would not be covered. That figure is up, actually, over previous years. The average number of non-payment evictions, 20-day evictions, is usually about 50% lower than that in any given year. So even if the CDC moratorium were to get extended, it wouldn't protect all in Rhode Island. And the second reason that I have to tell people that we need a real comprehensive moratorium on foreclosures and evictions in our state is because the CDC doesn't cover landlords. It does not protect small and medium-sized landlords. many of whom being a landlord is not a vocation, it's a situation. Folks from communities of color and black communities who own a home that they rent out to a tenant. They need to be protected from the banks foreclosing on their mortgage during a public health emergency, like we have now and may have in the future, declared by the governor. The bill that is going to become law in the state of Rhode Island, 183, protects all of those landlords. And that's why we have to say to people, we need real protection here in Rhode Island. 2 facts before I go. When you look at the statistics, the whitest places in our state see the lowest number of evictions. And when you look at the numbers in our state, the poorest areas in our state, District 15 in Pawtucket, District 49 in Woonsocket, and District 21 in Warwick, have the highest numbers of evictions filed. Out of those 3 districts, one senator's name is on this bill. And for some of the others in the committee, some of the others who are going to be voting on this when it gets recommended out onto the floor of the Senate for a vote, and for everybody who called in tonight, no matter if you're a landlord, an attorney, or somebody from South Providence trying to speak their truth to power, I just have one thing for you. We see your true colors shine through.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Walmusky. We appreciate your testimony. Thank you. Next, we have Joshua Nault from Rhode Island Center for Justice. Good evening, Mr. Nault. You're on right now to testify on Senate Bill 528. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Chairwoman and members of the committee, for allowing me to speak this evening. My name is Joshua Nault, and I am a public interest attorney with the Rhode Island Center for Justice, along with Jordan Mickman and Jen Wood, focused primarily on eviction defense and housing law. I am excited to speak tonight in support of Senate Bill 528 because an eviction on a tenant's rental record is often the most difficult barrier to securing a new rental unit. As anyone knows, evictions can happen for different reasons, but in Rhode Island, the person who is sued for eviction is subject to immediate reputational harm from the time of filing a lawsuit. Not only is this unfair for the tenant, who at that point has not had an opportunity to answer the complaint or challenge the validity of the action, it also undermines the goal of the plaintiff landlord by automatically creating an impediment to the defendant tenant finding new housing. To clarify, if the goal of most evictions is to remove a tenant from the property and the tenant's reputation is harmed as a result of the eviction simply being filed, then the plaintiff landlord necessarily impedes their own expedient recovery of the property by making it harder for the tenant to relocate. This can also contribute to protracted eviction proceedings and an unnecessary and preventable loss of unit marketability. Of course, a landlord has an interest in knowing to whom they're leasing a property, and Senate Bill 528 does not inhibit that interest in any meaningful way. Indeed, the interests which support the kind of judicial transparency that landlords require are primarily interests of health, safety, and financial stability of the tenant. Since financial stability is easily determined through credit checks, income verifications, and landlord references, the primary interest in judicial transparency for landlords become health and safety. Senate Bill 528 permits for those interests to be protected because if the eviction is based on the tenant's risk to others' health and safety, there's little chance that the eviction would be settled or resolved outside of formal litigation. Senate Bill 528 accommodates and protects these interests because eviction actions which end in judgment against a dangerous tenant are automatically unsealed and made available to potential future landlords. Another common occurrence in eviction actions is when the case is settled by agreement between the parties. Importantly, actions that end in settlement are not technical evictions, but are amicable resolutions to the lawsuit entered into by the parties. Our district courts in Rhode Island often encourage settlements between parties, and as such, a significant amount of eviction actions brought in district court end in amicably resolved agreements that result in something other than actual eviction. Nonetheless, without Senate Bill 528, those resolved actions remain viewable to potential landlords and are often made available to landlords through private service providers who often fail to provide the context behind a person's eviction record, such as an amicable resolution to the matter that ended in something other than eviction being executed on the property. Senate Bill 528 would preclude such misreporting by private service providers because, according to the bill, settled cases are sealed unless and until the parties fail to abide by the terms of the settlement. Even more, if in such a circumstance occurs where there is noncompliance, the record can be unsealed and made public for any future landlord to view. For all of these reasons, I am in favor of this bill, and I strongly encourage and respectfully request this body to pass this bill so that tenants' reputations can be more protected than our current system allows. And if I may also take a moment to voice my support for Bill 183 as well, which I think is integral to this moment in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes,
and thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Yes, Mr. Knoll, thank you so much. We have a long agenda, but you got a lot in there in a short amount of time, so we appreciate that. Do any committee members have any questions of Mr. Knoll?
Thank you.
I believe we have Lori Marie Piscota from the Mental Health Association of Rhode Island.
Hi.
Good evening and welcome to the committee.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you, Senator Kalman, for introducing this important legislation. My name is Lori Marie Piscota, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mental Health Association of Rhode Island, and we support Senate Bill 561. You may be wondering why Mental Health Advocacy Organization is testifying tonight on a housing bill, and that's because stable, safe housing is the foundation of good mental health. Housing is recovery, and housing is the foundation of all the good things in our lives. You might associate housing vouchers with people of low income, and that is certainly true, but I really want to make the point that many people with disabilities who live on SSI or SSDI benefits also receive housing vouchers. So I'm here talking about people with intellectual developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, and people with serious persistent mental illness. I'm sure you can imagine how nearly impossible it must be to find affordable housing when living on a fixed income, like Social Security disability benefits. Housing vouchers are critically important to people with disabilities. I lived in Massachusetts for 10 years, where I served as a case manager for adults living with HIV/AIDS. And in Massachusetts, we already have a law prohibiting landlords from discriminating against lawful sources of income, like Section 8. And without this law, I can tell you that case managers would never have housed any of our HIV-positive clients, because most of our clients lived on disability benefits and received housing vouchers. I've heard landlords express concerns that if they can't discriminate against people with housing vouchers, then they might get stuck with a terrible tenant without any power to evict them. But I don't believe that's what this bill does. I think that's a false choice in terms of this particular piece of legislation. This legislation doesn't force us to choose between stopping discrimination or forcing landlords to keep bad tenants. I think we can protect both parties. There's nothing in this legislation that prevents a landlord from doing a credit check or a reference check or inquiring about a person's income. I can't speak to other facets of Rhode Island's landlord-tenant law, but this particular piece of legislation, I don't think adds to that problem. It should be noted that bad tenants can and do lose their housing vouchers when they commit drug-related criminal activity, when they don't pay their rent and are facing eviction proceedings, and when they don't keep the utilities on in their units. So there's a lot of incentive to be a good tenant when you have a housing voucher, because if you lose your housing voucher, you may be eligible to apply for a housing voucher again, but you go at the very, very bottom of the list, and right now Section 8 has a 10-year waiting list. So housing vouchers might be indicative of a person who's a good bet for a landlord. This legislation is very important to people who live with disabilities. It doesn't cost the state anything to pass this legislation. I feel it's literally the very least that we can do to make a positive impact on the lives of people with disabilities. And it might even save money in the long run. if we have fewer people doubling up with relatives living on the streets, cycling in and out of emergency room departments, hospitals, prisons, and homeless shelters. Passing this legislation sends the message that Rhode Island does not tolerate discrimination against people with disabilities. I respectfully urge this committee to vote in favor of it. I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Pashota, we appreciate your testimony. Do any committee members have any questions of this witness? Next up, we have Callie Babbitt Spears from SOAR, Sisters Overcoming Abusive Relationships, and also representing Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Good evening, Ms. Spears.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening. You may begin your testimony on Senate Bill 561.
Thank you so much for your support, everybody here tonight. Good evening. My name is Callie Babbitt Spears, and I am a community activist, a mother of 6, and a survivor of domestic violence, and a member of SOAR, Sisters Overcoming Abusive Relationships. I am here today urging you all to support Senate Bill number 561, and this is why. When I was 20, I moved here to Rhode Island and met my now ex-husband. We moved into a house together after we had our first child. In that house is where the abuse began. Throughout the years that followed, our family grew and the abuse escalated. He threatened and assaulted me many times. While I wanted to leave, I feared becoming homeless and having to live in a vehicle with my children. I had no support. We were dependent on his income. I was finally able to leave and seek safety at a local domestic violence shelter. Because I was low income and most of my income was public assistance, my choices on where to live were really limited. I accepted an apartment with enough rooms for me and my children, but that was not safe. I knew my ex-husband would find me in that apartment complex. It was a small town, and this was the only low-income community there. Because of my source of income, I was forced to make a decision between safety and a roof over me and my children's heads. I applied for Section 8 shortly after moving in, and it took 8 years, actually. It took 8 years to receive that voucher. Even with the voucher, many of the options were out of my price range. After a very frustrating search, I finally found an apartment I could afford. But unfortunately, I was rejected by the landlord for having a voucher. Another landlord who knew I had a voucher told me he preferred to rent to college students. Having a voucher became more of a barrier, and I felt so nervous telling landlords I had a voucher in fear of rejection, even in the last minute of me being able to qualify. Other people also had Section 8 told me I shouldn't tell landlords about the voucher or they wouldn't rent to me. Ending discrimination based on source of income would have protected me from being denied a home just because I was receiving public assistance. At the end, I lost that voucher because I could not find someone that would rent to me and my family. I left an abusive relationship to then be controlled and affected by the lack of housing options available to keep me and my children safe. While safety is not included in the cost of rent, having a choice of where to live is the security that many families fleeing violence need. We must end the source of income discrimination. Thank you very much.
And
for your.
Go ahead. I was just going to
Thank
say,
you very
I really
much for your.
Yeah, I do appreciate your sharing your personal experiences.
Thank you.
Yes, very much, and for taking time to share those with our committee members.
Okay.
Thank you.
You for your consideration and importance of this legislation.
Of course. Next up, we have Mr. Robert Marshall from the Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Marshall. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, Chair Coyne and members of the Judiciary Committee. I'll be brief. Lori Marie just said pretty much everything I wanted to say and then some. We've been working very closely with the Mental Health Association on this particular issue. For people with developmental disabilities, they're almost always going to be relying on a Section 8 once they try to realize their dream of living independently. And if that's the case, then if we're going to continue to allow landlords to run ads that say no Section 8s, we might as well just tell them to run ads that say people with disabilities need not apply. The Senate has seen this and passed this bill in the past. We've had trouble in the House, but we've gotten it through the House this year. We hope the Senate will stand behind it and pass it again so that people with disabilities, with intellectual disabilities, people with physical disabilities, and people with mental health, persistent mental health issues can, find housing, be good tenants, and realize their dreams. Thank you again for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for your committed service and your advocacy for the developmental disabled in our communities. Do any committee members have any questions of Mr. Marshall? Next is Ms. Catherine Gradowski. Good evening, Ms. Gradowski. You may begin your testimony on Senate Bill 561.
Hi, Chairwoman and members of the committee. Thank you for taking the time to hear my testimony. I'm a small property owner and a Section 8 landlord, and I'm asking you to support Bills 561, 528, and 183, as well as the bills regarding sexual orientation and immigration status. Regarding Bill 561, this bill will help expand the reach and impact of one of Rhode Island's most valuable housing programs, the Rhode Island Housing Section 8 Voucher Program. Obviously, this bill isn't exclusive to vouchers. It covers unemployment, SSI, veterans benefits. But since that's the program that we know about, that's the one I'm going to testify on. As a landlord, I can testify to the value of this program from an owner's perspective. Participating in this program has helped us find and maintain reliable, high-quality tenants. It has provided a stable, reliable source of income during the pandemic. Rhode Island Housing has been a responsive partner, and they've actively helped us to keep our building in compliance. And I just want to stress that we've participated in this program for a number of years now, and we have not been adversely affected in any way by our participation in this program. We haven't found compliance to be invasive or onerous. On the contrary, it allows us to find high-quality tenants, maintain our property, and increase our investment in the neighborhood. It's a travesty that tenants wait years for a voucher only to find that they can't get a landlord to rent them. As South Coast Housing testified earlier, over 90% of voucher holders have been barred from over 90% of apartments that they can afford due to their source of income. And as others have said or will say or have testified, this legislation doesn't force us as landlords to lower our rents. It doesn't prevent us from screening tenants. It prevents us from refusing a tenant based on a lawful source of income. We should not, in our legislation, be permitting discriminatory practices in the interest of protecting marginal profit margins that aren't actually at threat from this bill. This legislation has come up many times before. It's been discussed and considered exhaustively, and I encourage you to pass it. If I have extra time, I'd like to speak briefly in support of 183 and 528.
Yes, briefly, please.
Thank you. Regarding 528, as a landlord, we are more than capable of doing research to find out whether a tenant is creditworthy without inquiring into their eviction history. Notice of a record doesn't tell you anything that you can't learn from a credit check and a reference check, but it can do irreparable harm to tenants by creating an additional barrier to entry, like the presence of a Section 8 voucher. It can be a backdoor to discriminatory practices, including illegal discrimination, that this committee should commit to addressing. And the same is true about a tenant's immigration status. It's simply not relevant to whether they can pay the rent or whether they keep the apartment in good shape. And lastly, regarding 183, it's important to keep in mind that the eviction moratorium doesn't provide money to tenants to help them pay the rent. What it does is it creates a critical window for rental assistance programs to mobilize to support both tenants and landlords. To date in Rhode Island, through COVID-19, these programs have paid out $7,200,000 directly to landlords, and yet eviction filings continue to pile up. In Providence County, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Obviously, we're averaging 10 evictions a day. The fact that we're not first in America in evictions shouldn't prevent us from addressing that problem. I support all of these bills in their entirety. I think it's important that there are a lot of landlords out there who believe that these are important bills and that this is important legislation to pass. Thank you for taking the time to hear my testimony. I really appreciate everyone on the committee and thank you for considering these bills.
Of course, and thank you so much for your patience this evening. We have a long list of witnesses, so thank you for your call. Next up, I believe we have Miss Hannah Stern of the ACLU of Rhode Island. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Stern.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for your time this evening. My name is Hannah Stern. I'm testifying on behalf of the ACLU of Rhode Island in very strong support of this legislation. The advocates tonight have well highlighted the many merits of this bill, so I'll be very brief, but I do just want to emphasize the protection that this legislation would ensure for members of lower income or marginalized communities in their search for stable and healthy and affordable housing. There really should be no reason that an individual should find themselves at a disadvantage in the housing market simply due to where their rental money is coming from. And there really should also be no ability for a landlord to deny a tenant based on the source of their income. So this legislation would appropriately make sure that tenants are not vulnerable to these situations, and we urge passage of this important bill. So thank you very much for your time. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stern. Any questions for the witness committee members? Next up, we have Elizabeth Burke-Bryant from Rhode Island Kids Count.
Good evening. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Elizabeth Burke-Bryant, Executive Director of Rhode Island Kids Count, and I'm here to provide our very strong support on Senate Bill 561. We'd like to thank Senators Coleman, Quesada, Chacon, Goodwin, Mack, Acosta, Oyer, and Murray for sponsoring this bill, and to Senator Coleman for introducing it. We are strongly in support of this bill because we know how difficult it is for families to find affordable housing. In 2019, 279 families with 603 children from across the state stayed at emergency homeless shelters, domestic violence shelters, and transitional housing programs. And we know that these numbers have only grown since the pandemic hit and many families have lost their jobs and homes. I know that you know that it is a long wait to get a housing voucher, formerly called the Section 8 voucher. Sometimes families wait 5 to 8 years to receive a housing choice voucher. And once they get them, it is just wrong that they can't use them because so many landlords don't take Section 8 or housing choice vouchers. This bill would rectify that problem, and it has been a long-standing problem with families being turned away from dozens of units before they find a landlord who will rent to them with a voucher. And some families simply give up. This is just a really, really important bill for Rhode Islanders, including children and families. We urge you to support this bill. I also want to say that we submitted written testimony in support of Senator Mack's Bill 528 and Senator Oyer's Bill 183. Thank you for your attention this evening.
And thank you so much for joining us this evening. You're a regular before our committee, so I really do appreciate all that you do for Rhode Island kids. And thank you again for your testimony this evening. Does anybody have any questions for Elizabeth Burke-Bryant? We don't have any questions at this time. Thank you.
And thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. Good night.
Sure thing. Just to let the committee members know, we're actually nearing the finish line here. We have perhaps 2 or 3 more witnesses before we conclude this evening's testimony. I believe we have Janice Flora Arsenal on the line. Good evening, Janice Flora Arsenal. You're here to testify on Senate 561.
Yes, hi. The reason why I wanted to testify is because I have a Section 8 voucher, and a Section 8 voucher does really help me to survive. And I'm low income, and I'm also disabled. I get SSDI, and if I didn't have the Section 8 voucher, I wouldn't be able to live. It would be too hard for me to afford to live with how high rents are, and landlords should not be able to discriminate against people that have Section 8 vouchers. And, they should be able to rent to people even if they have a Section 8 voucher or even if they have a disability. And last week I ran into a problem with my own landlord where I called her because of a heating issue, and she got mad. She didn't believe me it wasn't working, and then she even said, that she didn't believe me that it wasn't working. She said she wanted me out, and she said, and I'm never renting to another gateway client again. And I felt that was discriminatory. Now, I think so far as that issue's been resolved, but even by her saying another gateway client, that was kind of discriminatory, and then she would never want to rent to another gateway person again. I don't think landlords should be able to do that and say, oh, never another mental health client again. That was kind of discriminatory, I thought. But at least I think so far that now she realizes that there really was a heating problem in the whole house, and she knows that, but she shouldn't be able to think that, because I was the one that called her, and not any of the other tenants, that, just because it was me and not anyone else, to think that, it was just a her problem, not the housing problem, but it was a heating problem. They shouldn't be able to do that or have a vendetta against the tenant just because they have a voucher or they know the person has a mental health condition. And, and I didn't do anything wrong. All I did was tell her that there was no heat.
Well, it's really important to hear experiences from Rhode Islanders out there in the public, and it's very helpful when we go to assess the legislation that has been filed and is in committee to be heard. So I do appreciate the time that you've taken today to call in and share your experience. Do any committee members have any questions of the witness? Now we're going to move on to Senate Bill 563, an act relating to property, Rhode Island Fair Housing Practices Act. We have no testimony for Senate Bill 501 or 504, so this will be the last bill that we hear testimony on. I believe the first witness up is David Savitsky, Dr. David Savitsky. Good evening, Doctor. Welcome to the committee.
Hello. I assume you guys, I'm speaking to the committee now.
Yes, and you are speaking on Senate Bill number 563, an act relating to property, Rhode Island Fair Housing Practices Act.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, hello, Senators Kalman, Mack, Savani, Cano, Valverde, DiMario, and Golden. I wrote this out and submitted it in writing, so you have it as well. But I made it very short. I'm a resident of Providence, a constituent of Senator Golden. I work in Rhode Island at a large mental health center, Gateway Healthcare. It's a lifespan partner, and where I'm a child psychiatrist and associate medical director. So this testimony, I'm not representing my agency, but I would like to offer the illumination of the value that this bill would provide to my patients. When my patients have to move, it is an ordeal at best. And if they knew that financial ability to pay the rent, ability to live peacefully with their neighbors would determine whether a landlord would rent to them, it would be tough, but it would be fair. However, the exemption in this law that allows a landlord to discriminate purely on the basis of the expression of gender identity or sexual orientation is manifestly unfair. It's resulted in patients who remain in unsafe situations because they're unable to find a safe place that will rent to them. It has pressured patients to hide their identities and orientations, which results in psychological damage, worsening of depression, and raises anxiety. The amendment to the fair housing laws would simply delete that opportunity to express prejudice in a public arena. It makes our state a more fair and welcoming home for all, and I wholeheartedly support this bill.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony. Do any committee members have any questions of this witness? Thank you very much. Next, we'll go on to Mr. Ethan Huckle, TGI Network of Rhode Island. I believe we have Mr. Huckle on the line. Welcome to the committee, and you're testifying on Senate Bill 563.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of committee for your time tonight. My name is Ethan Huckle. I am testifying in support of Bill 563. I serve as the board president of TGI Network of Rhode Island, which is a nonprofit serving the transgender community with peer support and advocacy. And this legislation is an important step toward improving the lives of community members by protecting their right to fair housing. Housing is honestly the number one issue that community members bring to us, the lack of available and safe housing. I know you know that transgender people face discrimination in all arenas of life, so I won't go into all of those statistics, but housing discrimination remains a major impediment to our physical, mental health, and safety. So many community members can afford housing, but they can't find people who will rent to them. They report that they respond to available listings only to be denied upon arrival. Or they have housing and they're subjected to harassment and abuse because of their gender expression. It's important to note that transgender people are much less likely to have a support network to rely on, and the lack of housing leads to higher rates of anxiety and depression and other unsafe housing choices. It's a problem that really compounds. So I urge you to consider first how your life would be affected if you couldn't rely on your housing to be safe or secure, regardless of your ability to pay rent. And we at TGI Network urge you to support this bill and vote it out of committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Huckle? Okay. Okay, I believe we have Molly Scavuzzo-Dugan on the line to speak on Senate Bill 183. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Scavuzzo-Dugan. You're speaking on
Hi.
S183.
Hi, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to circle back around to me, and I do want to keep this brief, just to give others chances to be able to talk. So I primarily do want to testify in support of 183, and while I did try to see if it was possible for me to testify on behalf of my employer, I never got word back from them about that. But I want to, just share a little bit of my experiences working through the coordinated entry system in Rhode Island. That system used to, be run by my employer, but now is with the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. And while I don't have, a well put together testimony, and I'm very impressed with what I've heard tonight regarding, the numbers and statistics of people who have lost their housing because of this pandemic and because of predatory practices by their landlords to get around the eviction moratorium. I can tell you all from anecdotal experience how incredibly heartbreaking and just gut-wrenching it is to listen to family after family and person after person on the phone crying and sobbing with me to try and see if there's any way that I can save them from losing their housing, being outside, and in some cases experiencing the trauma all over again of having to sleep outside. I can tell you right now that it is a well-known fact amongst all of us that shelter space in Rhode Island is extremely limited, that waiting lists are often weeks, if sometimes almost a month long in certain places. And some people are also, at a point where they've experienced homelessness for so long that they've ended up burning bridges with a lot of these shelters. So when they lose their opportunity to be able to, get protected from eviction, they often have nowhere else to go. Sorry, rambling, but I just want to say that I think it's vitally important that the committee pass 183. I think you're going to be saving a lot of lives. That's my piece.
Thank you very much, Molly. I appreciate your testimony. Does anybody have any questions for Molly? Next up, we have Deborah Levy from Childhood Lead Action Project. Welcome to the committee, Ms. Levy.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much, Chair Coyne, and to the members of the committee, and thank you for coming back to this important bill to hear our testimony. I really appreciate it. My name is Deborah Levy. I'm a renter in Providence, and I'm a community organizer at the Childhood Lead Action Project. We're a local community organization dedicated to eliminating childhood lead poisoning through parent support, community education, and grassroots advocacy since the 90s. So I'm here to testify today in support of Senate Bill 183 to institute an eviction and foreclosure moratorium. I also want to voice my support for Bills 528 and 561. I think they all really go hand in hand, so I appreciate you hearing my testimony on all three. I want to agree with what the other supporters of these bills have said and also share the reasons that I'm supporting them. From a professional standpoint, the work that I do in the fight for lead poisoning prevention is part of a broader fight for safe, healthy, and secure housing for all, and linked to the issue of evictions. During the pandemic, lead poisoning has not gone away, and in fact, screening rates are down and poisoning numbers are likely up. But it's really difficult to worry about chipping paint or other lead hazards when you have to worry about keeping a roof over your head. We've heard from many tenants that their landlords would rather move to evict or terminate their tenancy rather than deal with a complaint about lead hazards in their unit. So lead poisoning of young kids can often lead directly to threat of eviction. In the past year, I've also worked on tenants' rights issues more broadly, including one-on-one work with tenants being threatened with eviction. You've heard a lot of their stories tonight. I've seen time and time again that the federal eviction moratorium and the assistance programs we've had in this state are just not enough to keep people housed. The CDC moratorium only covers evictions for non-payment and is not proactive. It involves people having access to the internet, having access to a printer, knowing the steps that they have to take to go out of their way to make sure that they're protected. This bill would address the equity issues with that moratorium and institute proactive protection for Rhode Island's most vulnerable renters. I also know that this is an issue of justice. We know that the burden of eviction falls most heavily on Black people and other people of color, and we know that the wave of evictions that we're seeing in this state is a sign and symptom of systemic racism. This is not just a professional issue for me, it's a personal issue. Like I said, I'm a renter in Providence, so are most of my friends and loved ones in this state. The stories that I've heard from them and from people I've worked with in the last year have been heartbreaking, like some of the ones you've heard tonight. I'm here because I know how much difference this bill is going to make for the people I know, for the people I've tried to help, for the people that I've had to tell that no help is available in the last year. I'm here for them. and I'm here because I know this is what our community needs. Evictions are cruel always, but especially right now. We've been asking for a comprehensive eviction moratorium in this state for almost a year, and honestly, I'm ashamed that it hasn't happened sooner, but it's not too late for this to happen. This bill won't forgive anyone's rent debt. It won't give a home back to people who've already been evicted, but it will give renters and homeowners more time to get back on their feet. And hand in hand with the other bills will let them not end up with an eviction on their record and not be discriminated against for their source of income. So it will help to guarantee people a basic human right in the middle of a global pandemic. So I really implore you to really listen to the stories that you've heard from tenants this evening and to see that voting to pass 183, 528, and 561 to protect Rhode Islanders from eviction, from the stigma it carries, from housing discrimination is really the only ethical choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Levy. Any committee members have any questions? I believe next up is Kenya Fullen from People's Social Services. Welcome to the committee. You may begin your testimony on Senate Bill 183.
Is this agreeing with the bill?
Yes, you can just testify whether or not, yes, whether you support or oppose the bill.
So I support the bill of not evicting tenants who don't have the means to pay now due to the COVID.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
That's it. And I don't think landlords should just go to their tenants' houses and just put the stuff out on the streets illegal. That's been going on.
Well, I appreciate you calling in, and I appreciate your testimony.
All right. Thank you, and have a good night.
Yes, you too. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.